So, as you will know if you're watching this video, the G20 Summit has been going on in Hamburg, Germany. It's rounded up today. The G20, if you don't know, is the world's 19 most economically developed countries plus the European Union. And they are represented by President Donald Trump of the United States, Prime Minister Theresa May of the United Kingdom, President Vladimir Putin of the Russian Federation, President Xi Jinping of the People's Republic of China, Prime Minister Paolo Gentiloni of Italy, President Michel Temer of Brazil, President Maurizio Macri of Argentina, Mohammed Al Jadaan, who is the Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia. I imagine his advanced years kept King Salman away. Chancellor Angela Merkel, who is the host of the summit, President Emmanuel Macron of France, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey, President Enrique Pena Nieto of Mexico, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada, Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull of Australia, Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India, President Joko Widodo of Indonesia, and I believe I've covered everyone there, and President Donald Tusk representing the European Council, President Moon Jae-in of South Korea, and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan. Now, for some leaders, they have been to many of these summits before. I was trying to work out who's the most senior of the leaders. I think that actually may be Angela Merkel, the host. For President Macron and President Trump, it is their first summits. I believe it's Theresa May's second. I believe she was in the Hangzhou summit last year, shortly after she entered number 10. So, what I want to do is speak a little bit about the specific summit, about the G20 in general, and about some of the unrest that's been going on in Hamburg. Um, the G20 is a big event. G20 summit is a big event. It always creates a significant deal of controversy because you have here 20 of the most powerful people in the world gathered in one place. Inevitably, the security is going to be extremely tight. Um, a terrorist incident, one of these things would be absolutely, you can only imagine what that would be like. Apparently, there were security issues around Melania Trump, apparently about the protests. The main issues being discussed at this particular G20 summit were Syria, North Korea, and the tensions around North Korea, um, the humanitarian situations developing a good part of the Middle East and Africa, and women's empowerment in terms of women's representation in developing countries in the workforce. So, all very important issues. One of the major things that has come up is the Paris Climate Agreement of 2015 and the fact that President Trump has pulled out of that. In my personal opinion, that was a major mistake. I think history will not judge Trump kindly for that. I just think it makes no sense to isolate your country from the rest of the world. You either believe the scientists or you believe people with a vested interest in, the oil industry and so on. So yeah, I'm on the side of those who think that there is a real issue with climate change. I don't think that's my position, and I don't think it's a left wing position. I think it's a common sense position. Um, but regarding what I really want to talk about is some of the protests around the G20 because they always happen. Well, I say always. They didn't happen in China last year in Hangzhou. One reason for that is because Chinese anarchists wouldn't dare, riot in the way that they do in Germany. But certainly when this takes place in democratic countries where freedom of assembly is considered a basic right, it's always abused. And what frustrates me about these things is that you get legitimate concerns that people have about the G20, but they're always hijacked by, frankly, anarchist criminals. And it's usually the Black Bloc group. I really have no respect for these people. As far as I'm concerned, if you're covering your face and you're burning someone else's property, you're a thug. And you might think you're some sort of political activist or ideologue, but in the end of the day, it's just criminal behavior. And that sort of stupidity is not going to help a single child out of poverty. It's just stupid. Um, and the truth is, it happens every time. These people don't give a damn about the famine in South Sudan, the cholera crisis, and the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. That isn't the motivating factor. They are just brats who want to protest in a violent way. There are legitimate issues around the G20, for example, the fact that the world's 20 most developed countries get to call the shots on the rest of the world. Although they always have invited, I guess you could say, observer nations. So, for example, Guinea was one of them this year. The G20, I think there is many legitimate issues around it, but it is better than nothing. And my question to those who just want to scrap the G20, what's your alternative? I think the G20 is an improvement from the G8 or the G7. That was a time, I do think that was underrepresentative, and that still goes on, but it's virtually meaningless nowadays. I remember about 10 years ago, I remember when Britain hosted the G8 in 2005. It was a really big thing at that time. Now, G7, G8 summits are basically meaningless. So there's a lot more focus on the G20. I remember when Gordon Brown hosted the G20 in London in 2009. Around that time, it was starting to gain traction. But there's all sorts of kind of groupings of nations, there's BRICS. Um, President Jacob Zuma was a leader, I forgot, of South Africa. Um, there's a few nations there that are notably absent, which I find interesting. Nigeria. I'm surprised that President Muhammadu Buhari is not attending the summit. I would have thought Nigeria was in the G20, so I was surprised to find out that it wasn't. Um, in terms of geopolitical powers, I would have thought Iran, Egypt, um, possibly Indonesia. Well, Indonesia is there, but Iran, Egypt, Pakistan, I would have thought they would be represented for no other reason they're politically powerful or politically significant. So, there's a lot of issues around the G20 that's, I can understand the criticism, but rioting, burning other people's property, this is not going to do a damn thing to stop the meeting going on. It's just not going to do anything. I do understand, and I will always defend the right for people to dissent. But what I don't support is violent stupidity. Um, throwing things at police officers, damaging property is not going to help a single person. I do think the world is facing particularly serious problems at the moment. There's a refugee crisis in Europe, and that's a very contentious issue because there are legitimate questions over how many of these people really are refugees and who are basically infiltrating this situation for opportunism, i.e., who are economic migrants. That's a big issue. But there is major things going on in the world right now. I can't remember a time when there was four simultaneous famines going on at once in northeast Nigeria, South Sudan, Yemen, and Somalia. In terms of Syria, there may be some good news. There may finally be some sort of breakthrough. With Syria, there's always going to be finger pointing, and it's like every major conflict in history. Historians are going to debate over it. People are going to argue passionately over the internet. I personally feel that there's been too much blame directed at the West unfairly, but the most important thing is getting some stability in that country. And if two major powers in Washington and Moscow can get some sort of agreement, that can only be a good thing. Um, which is brings me to the next thing that came up, which was Trump and Putin meeting. There was a lot of focus around that. Obviously, there was a lot of niceties among these leaders, but apparently Trump is taking a slightly tougher line on this. You know, as much as I am critical of Putin's Russia, I don't actually necessarily want Trump to go in there guns blazing and saying, wanting to get into a fight with Putin. And likewise, I think it would be a mistake for Putin to do that with Trump. Um, I think one of the biggest issues facing the world today, my personal opinion, is that the biggest geopolitical threat that we face as a planet is pan-Islamism. But there are some very close seconds to that. The rise of ultranationalism in countries like Russia and China can be a serious problem. North Korea in itself, I don't think it threatens the entire world, but I think it is definitely critical enough to be a major, major issue. I don't think we're heading towards global conflict, but because for that to happen, you would need to simultaneously have collective irresponsibility. I don't think there is any willpower from any of the major players to see a war in the Korean Peninsula. Nevertheless, this is different from previous occasions because this time you have an American president who's made it clear that he's not going to keep making idle warnings. At some point, the Americans are going to take action. And frankly, maybe it's about time. So China can no longer just say, oh, we condemn this nuclear launch. We're just going to kind of, speak behind the scenes. I think China does wield a lot of influence, probably more than they're letting on. I think the biggest fear for China is a war on the Korean Peninsula leading to a refugee crisis, because they look at what's happening in Europe with the conflicts in the Middle East. I think they fear this mass influx of North Korean refugees. But if that's what they fear, then China could be doing a lot more to isolate North Korea. For a start, I think Chinese companies, and I think President Trump is right about this, need to stop propping up the regime. It is true that sanctions often hit the people hardest, but there needs to be a way to punish Pyongyang directly. And by the same token, I don't know if it is the best idea for Washington and Seoul to continue joint military exercises, maybe so frequently. Um, there has to be some collective responsibility here. In order to get China to the table, China needs to be reassured that America and South Korea are not going to be a threat to Beijing. So this is diplomacy. A war in the Korean Peninsula would be utterly devastating. Anyway, I'm going to round this up. Let me know your thoughts. But I basically think the protests around this, I understand people are frustrated. I understand there's a lot of questions. But burning someone else's car, vandalizing shops, that's not political activism. That's thuggery. And I hope these people are arrested. I have no sympathy with them. Um, Finally, by its very nature, this is controversial. I know people are not going to agree with everything I've said in this video, and that's fine. I would ask you to keep comments civil. If you disagree with anything I've said, fine. I'm not going to censor comments, but keep them civil. Um, in the end of the day, most of us making videos are regular people. These powerful world leaders have enormous responsibility and they're under enormous pressure. And I think there is legitimate criticism to be made. But for the sake of everyone, I think we have to hope that the G20 summits at least get some breakthroughs. People who want to completely abolish them, and I'm aware this comes from both the populist left and the populist right. My question is, what is your alternative? Do you really want a world where countries are completely inward looking and there's no international sort of cooperation? What is the alternative? That is my fundamental question. So if you're completely skeptical of the G20, you think it's a waste of time, you think, oh, it's a gathering of the global elite. My question is, excuse me, what is the alternative? What would you propose? And I'm genuinely asking that. I would be interested to know what people propose. Rather than just criticizing it, I want to know what alternative people propose. Okay, thank you for watching.